Okay, thank you so much. Great. So before we get started, so maybe I would like to give the floor to you, Moria, and just maybe update everyone on what's happening in the month of October with our KMGN KM Global Week.
Thank you. So for those who are not aware yet, we are celebrating our Global KM Week less than a month from now. I'll share my screen for a minute or two. Here we go. So last year we started the idea of Global KM Week, and we decided to hold it on the third week of October every year. So last year it was on October 16 to 20. This year we're celebrating it on October 14 to 18. The idea is whether you are an organization, network, an academy, university, community, class, whatever, you can and you are asked to hold some KM activities that week because we want to draw more awareness and more willingness and more knowledge and more abilities and more reinforcement of KM so that we really have more impact, shared impact in order to have more and better KM worldwide. So as I said, it can be any group you want, but the idea is that it's like a festival. It's like Woodstock. You decide what you're doing, whether you are holding an event or participating in an event or both. Those who are interested in more details, please address me or follow me on LinkedIn. I'm writing on it. I'm now showing you we are holding a database, and it will also be converted into a calendar with all the events that will take place. So you can see 24/7 what will be happening this week, whether physical, whether online, whether hybrid, in different places. Those who cannot hold it that week but want to celebrate this idea are welcome to do it 1 month before or after. So we're going to have a wonderful week. We're going to have better KM after it. So we're calling you all to join, and I'll stop now because we have a very tight schedule for today. More details, please contact me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moria. And yes, so you will find also all the event on the KMGN website, so you can see if some of them probably happening in your country or some of them available online where you can join from wherever you are. Great. So let me just share my screen for a few seconds. So here we go. Great. So today is our 10th meeting, so we can celebrate our 10th, not anniversary, but yeah, our 10th meeting. So some of you are always new to the to this community. So the purpose is really to look at research, but on an academic, but also non-academic way. And so we try to have different topics that are presented by different group of people in order to for them to share what they are currently working on or work in progress. It doesn't have to be finalized type of research. And so the idea is to exchange and to ask questions and potentially also to establish some future collaboration. So we have a WeChat group. Some of you are already part of it. For those of you who are not, I'm just going to post on the chat the link for you to join this community. Don't worry, we don't overwhelm you with posts. We just send a couple of reminders or whatever. So feel free to join if you're not already yet part of this WhatsApp community. The overall community of this research group, if I'm correct, Moria, you said is around 250 people now who have joined and signed up. So that's a good critical mass, and we are very happy about this. Now, these are some of the events we ran already in the past. So all of them are available. You can access them on our YouTube channel, and I just shared also the link on the chat. So all our past events have been recorded, and you can access them whenever you want. And if you have to leave early or whatever today, you will also find this recording in a few days from now on our KMGN research community channel. Great. So let me tell you a little bit about our speaker today. So I had just chance to meet Stefania. I was trying to calculate, but I will say at least 20 years ago, when we were both PhD students. So I was at George Washington University, and also Stefania was visiting from Italy, working on our research, and we stay connected since then. And at one point we were working, well, not at one point, at 2 points we were working together. At one point when we were at New York Institute of Technology in the Kingdom of Bahrain. And then more recently, when she joined us also at the Institute for Knowledge and Innovation, Southeast Asia in Bangkok. So she's an old friend of mine, and I'm very thankful that she accepted today to share with all of us a research paper that she recently published, and that she will explain to us in detail today. So just before leaving you the floor, Stefania, so we will have our next, usually we try to have 4 or 5 events per year. So this might be the last one for this year, but next year we will send you, I mean, in the upcoming months, who will be our speaker. And if some of you are interested to be one of our speakers, please email me or email Moria, and we'll be delighted. The planning for next year is not full yet, so we'll be happy to have you as one of our speakers. Okay, well, I will stop sharing. And my dear friend Stefania, the screen is yours. Please feel free to share. So Stefania will present, I guess, during 20-30 minutes or a bit more if needed, and then we'll take Q&A. If you have Q&A along the way, you can still ask them through the chat, but we will address them just at the end of the presentation. Stefania, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vincent, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Stefania Mariano, and I'm an associate professor of management in the School of Business Administration at the American University of Sharjah. This is the pictures of our campus. We are located in Sharjah. Sharjah is the 3rd largest emirate of the UAE. We are not very far from downtown Dubai. It takes about 30 minutes car ride from our campus to downtown Dubai when there is no traffic. I want to say also something about AUS. AUS has been recently celebrating its 25th anniversary. We are a young university, but already included in many national and international ranking systems. For instance, we've been included in the top 5 universities worldwide for student diversity. We've also been included in the top 50 under 50 university. We have almost 90 plus nationality represented on campus. And so we have a very diversified body of students, faculty, staff, and we're very proud of that. A little bit about SBA, the School of Business Administration, where I'm based at. Last year, SBA was ranked top in the country and among the top 200 universities worldwide for the fields of accounting and finance and business and management. And in national ranking, our graduates are the top choice for employment. Now, a little bit about myself. I've been studying knowledge dynamics in organization for about 20 years now. I'm particularly interested in how organization acquire, retain, remember, and forget organizational knowledge. I'm also interested in the nature of organizational knowledge, and I've been studying the intersection between organizational knowledge and organizational behavior. Today, I will be discussing a research paper that was published in the Journal of Knowledge Management. It was a systematic literature review. And I was particularly interested in the process of organizational professionalization in small and medium-sized enterprise from a knowledge-based perspective. Why did I become interested in organizational professionalization? Mostly because over the years, I conducted several research studies in startup context and also small and medium-sized enterprise context. And one of the reasons that and things that was very important for this organization was the process of professionalization over the years. So this was a crucial aspect of these types of organization. I went through the literature, the scholarly literature, and I couldn't find a synthesis of current conversation. So I wanted to contribute with a piece that would help systematize what was already known and help in advance future understanding with a research agenda. In the paper that I published, I define organizational professionalization as a process through which an organization is transformed into a more formalized, structured, and institutionalized corporation. And this happened because of changes to its organizational structures, policies, procedure, practice, and resources. I developed 3 research questions. The first research question had to do with how SMEs professionalize their operation and how this was discussed in the management and organization study literature. The second one had to do with the role of knowledge while SMEs were attempting professionalization attempt. So this was a knowledge-based perspective. And the third research question had to do with the research area that needs further investigation. So defining a research agenda for further investigation. I conduct the systematic literature review through a 3-step process of planning, conducting, and reporting. In the planning phase, I was particularly interested in identifying the need for the study, the research question, and most importantly, the research protocol, with the criteria for inclusion and exclusion of the article. The conducting phase was important because it helped me in identify the articles to assess from 3 different data sets, from Scopus, AB Inform Global, and Science Direct. I applied the criteria for inclusion and exclusion. I finalized the list, and at the end, I had a list of 78 articles that were published in 48 different journals. The analysis of the article was done using a deductive coding approach. I developed a coding framework. I was particularly interested in understanding the causal condition, so why SMEs would attempt a professionalization, initiate this professionalization. The intervening conditions that could moderate or mediate the process, the modes of professionalization, and the possible consequences of the process. Over the last 40 years, there seems to be an increased interest in organizational professionalization. So from some descriptive statistics, I was able to see how the evolution happened over the years. So there is an increased numbers of publications that happened from 1980, the first years that I took into consideration because it was the first published article in that year until 2022. Not surprisingly, the majority of this study focused on small and medium-sized enterprises, but also family-owned business. And at times, there were studies that also focused on small organizations that were attempting to internationalize their operation through professionalization practices. Interesting, there were many empirical studies conducted as part of the articles that I reviewed, and they were scattered pretty much all around the world. But the US and Spain were the country where the most empirical studies were conducted. 11 studies in the US and 9 studies in Spain. In terms of contribution, the empirical contribution outnumbered the conceptual contribution, and quantitative study represent 50% of the empirical contribution. At the end of the process, I was able to come up with an organizing framework. So this is pretty much like the summary of the entire process. Let's start with the left-hand side of the framework to better understand what the current scholarly conversation is saying about organizational professionalization. Now, the first things that I was able to understand from the analysis of the literature is that the professionalization was initiated for three basic reasons. The first reason was because the organization had a need to change, and they recognized this need to change the operation. The second one happened because, for instance, there was a succession stage. So from one generation of owner to another generation of owner, where the second generation of owners wanted to professionalize the operation. And this seems to be particularly relevant in family-owned business. And the third reason is because the organization reached a threshold stage. So the organizational structures and the organizational system were not able to support the growth opportunity. And that's why they needed to be restructured and be professionalized. In terms of the modes, I was able to identify individual level and the collective level type of professionalization modes. At the individual tacit knowledge level, SMEs were able to professionalize in three different ways: by hiring independent board of directors that would introduce freshly tacit knowledge into the organization, by hiring professional managers, or by replacing the head of key function. So, for instance, a head of department such as finance and accounting, marketing, or HR, and so forth. There were no studies that actually discussed the individual explicit knowledge contribution to professionalization. So this would be one of the research areas that I suggest for further investigation. At the collective level, there were different ways that these SMEs were attempting and trying to professionalize the operation. At the collective tacit knowledge level, this was done in two different ways. First, by professionalizing entire function. Many studies discuss the key role of HR department. So a professional HR department was really important because hiring talent, retaining this talent, was crucial for keeping the organization up to date with professional knowledge. So at the collective level, it was really important to focus on a professional human resource department among the other departments. At the level of the community, there were a certain number of ways that could help in professionalizing the collective tacit knowledge. And for instance, some of these ways include intra-organizational consultation, or shared stories, or knowledge sharing practices, or improving the communication process. Because the moment that the organization became a larger entity, the communication process needed also to be restructured, because the previous way of doing things were not effective anymore. And so it was really important to diffuse this professional knowledge through proper communication processes. At the collective explicit knowledge, two ways were used by SMEs. The first one regarded the professionalization of structures through a formalization of this structure. What does that mean? That the organization had to clearly define the new chain of command and span of control, and they had to revise the organizational chart. But in some study, they also discussed the capacity to codify and clarify the job description. Because the moment that organization moved from small entities to larger entities, the job description probably changed. And so it was very important to capture this change codified so that the new job description could be clear. It could also be clear who to refer to. So a clear chain of command with empowerment practice, but at the same time also delegation practice. And this was crucial moving to a larger organization. The formalization of the system regarded mostly the standard operating procedure that needed to be codified. And this standard operating procedure, or new rules or new policies, needed to be put into a formalized and codified format, so that could be spread across the entire organization. There were also a certain number of studies that discussed the process of professionalization from a practice perspective. And so they identified individual and organizational practice. At the individual level, some studies discussed the way that managers were strategizing So strategizing was one of the practices used by managers in professionalization attempt. One out of the many practices was, for instance, an improved networking or improved formalization of communication processes. And another practice was to help individuals to project a professionalism. And some studies were discussing the fact that being a professional meant to be team-oriented or to be open-minded or to be emotionally self-controlled or to be possessing professional ethics. So all aspects that need to be infused in the workforce so that the organization could be defined as a professional one. At the organizational level, there were the training practices that were mentioned in many studies, but also like the strategic use of meetings and the use of monitoring system to make sure that things would be up to date with the changes that the organization was going through. I was also able to identify a certain number of intervening conditions. And this condition had to do with the individuals, the organization, but also the external environment. At the individual level, many studies discussed demographic variables. For instance, there were a certain number of studies that discussed the importance of age and correlated age with experience. And this was very important to have experienced people joining the organization and stay within the organization. But there were also studies that were discussing the level of restraint. For instance, the fact that many people would resist professionalization attempt because there was an aversion to risk and aversion to organizational change. And this might have been a problem in attempting a successful professionalization attempt. At the level of the organization, most of the study discussed the role of values, but most importantly, organizational culture. But also in some study, they refer to some restraints, such as, for instance, micropolitics, internal micropolitics, or the inertia. And this principle of inertia that didn't allow organizational change to flow within the new context. The external conditions that were mostly discussed in this study regarded the industry level, but also the country level. At the country level, for instance, the availability of availability to workforce that was educated to be recruited within the organization, but also in some study they refer to the legal system of the country and how this system could impact the way that the organization was changing. In terms of the consequences, most of them were positive consequences. If a professionalization attempt were successful, then there was proposed positive links with increased performance, better organizational growth, improved internationalization attempt, and also increased innovation. Now, one emerging finding that I was not expecting when I started investigating the literature was this concept that I refer to as multidimensionality. This has to do with the fact that the majority of the study proposed that organizational professionalization was very complex, but also multidimensional, because it had to do with the individual and the collective level, with tacit and explicit knowledge. So it was a very complex process. At the same time, it was very context-specific. So what might work in one context may not necessarily work in another context, very process-based, and it was a not once and for all acquired status. So the organization had to keep working to keep this professionalization in place. At the end of the process, I was also able to come up with a certain number of research directions. The first one has to do with the role of individual explicit knowledge during professionalization attempts. There were no studies that investigated this particular aspect. So for instance, there were not studies that focused on the manager personal notes or the summaries or guidelines on how chart and template could help in aiding professionalization attempt. And this probably might be one area to investigate further. And I suggest to investigate that through qualitative study or to using process-based study and seeing these artifacts as mediator or moderator of the process. Another research direction is the role of attention management during professionalization attempt, because especially at the managerial level, it seems that a crucial aspect was to be able to manage the attention of these managers that were pulling in some and pushed and pulled in so many different directions, and so need to have a priority on things to get done. The third area has to do with organizational mnemonics, so the role of learning and forgetting, but also organizational knowledge, moving from an SMEs, small organization, to a more professional organization. And the last one is, and I think this might require like many hours to be spent in the research setting, but probably maybe the most interested, is to study the process of professionalization processually, so from a process-based perspective. Now, what's next? I have to say that I've been conducting research study for now about 3 years in one research setting, and the data that I've been collecting so far seems to confirm what the existing research has told us so far. But I need like additional research setting to investigate, to explore the phenomenon further. It would be interesting also to conduct comparative study to see differences between Western and Eastern approaches to professionalization, or if professionalization may not always be the case for startups or SMEs. Maybe there are other ways to make the organization growth or become a more developed entities. So if you are interested, you have a research setting that you want to be investigated, just feel free to get in touch with me. And I want to close my presentation with an open-ended question that I want to ask to the audience today, because majority, I'm assuming that many of them are like practitioners. They have maybe experienced professionalization attempt. So in your working experience, working in organization or consulting for organizations that have been growing or restructuring and attempting professionalization attempt, what do you think was the role of organizational knowledge? Do you think also that current conversation in the scholarly literature is capturing everything that is happening at the empirical level, or do you think that there is more that we need to say? There is more to add to the conversation. I would be very interested in hearing from your experience and to open the conversation. I want to really thank you for giving me the time to present today, and I look forward to hearing from the audience and what they have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefania. Great piece of work. So we got already 2 questions for the chat. Maybe David, you can ask, really take the mic and ask directly the question. I think it will be more friendly to do it that way.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for that presentation, Stefania. It was really interesting to see the research that you've done and sort of what's actually coming out in the literature, and more interestingly, you know, the gap that you've identified there on what's not coming out. So my question is, did you have a look at the motivation by people to participate in those sorts of organizational activities? And did you notice any patterns in that, or what was motivating them, whether it's intrinsic or extrinsic?
Well, at the managerial level, certainly, I think that the #1 reason why managers were involved in professionalization attempt is because they recognize the importance of change, the need to change the organization, and also at times it was just a need for the organization, because when you reach a threshold stage, the structure and system cannot hold the organizational growth anymore. So these were like the motivation for the initiation of professionalization. I have to say that in the research that I'm investigating so far, so I'm talking more about empirical part of the research agenda that I have. In the organization that I am exploring, yes, there were many people who were happily implementing the changes in the organization and participating in the professionalization attempt, but were also people that were not able to cope with that. And at the end of the day, then these people decided to leave the organization because simply it was a complete restructuring of way of doing things, and they were not willing to actually take part in this restructuring. So when I asked the question to the manager of the company, one of the things that they were telling me also had to do with the some demographic characteristics. For instance, it seems that the younger employees were more able to cope with the change, and and it seems also those who had like education in management practices. So for instance, they were, like a bachelor in management science or, like management studies. They also recognized that those changes were very important. And so they were happily implementing the change and actually contributing in proposing ways to change. So this would be certainly very interesting to investigate more. Okay, so I think at the individual level, what really makes one person being happy with, this initiation of professionalization versus individual that may not accept that. So I think that there might be room for further investigation, but certainly from the empirical data that I collect so far, I can see both happening in the context that I'm examining right now.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
you
you.
had a follow-up question, David? You want to ask it also?
Oh, yes, I did have another one there that I was thinking about, which was about, did you see any correlation between having really good an objective or strategy for the organization, or a mission statement, or even a just cause, and the effectiveness of the program of it?
The company that I'm investigating right now hasn't completed the process of professionalization. So started the process a few years back, but it's still under the process, and there are lots of, like impediments and things that needs to be fixed. So from empirical perspective, I don't have data that may, give this particular answer to the question. In the literature review that I conducted, I don't think that there was one specific article that was discussing this particular issue. But from your take, maybe from your experience, what do you think would be a possible direction, even for scholars who are interested in this phenomenon?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it just came up to me because I'm working in the with the Association of Project Management. Mm-hmm. And we're doing a lot of professionalization and setting up of communities of practice. And we've just spent a bit of time working on if you've seen the work by Simon Sinek on Just Cause, mm-hmm. if you might, and just setting a really clear objective for what the organization wants to do, and having that shared strategy, or that shared understanding, we think is making a difference, but it's too early to tell. So I was just curious to see if you'd seen any correlation at all.
I think this may also be connected to the fact that in the literature, we don't really have studies on the individual explicit knowledge. So for instance, let's suppose that a manager make this statement and codify the statement into a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so maybe the use of this particular PowerPoint presentation to be shared with the entire organization may also have an impact on the way that the organization is eventually accepting or rejecting the professionalization attempt. So what you're describing to me is really like an artifact that may be used as a mediator or moderator of the process. And this is certainly, in my opinion, a very interesting study, but it has to be a longitudinal exploration. So the moment that this particular artifact is used, and then the potential outcome after a certain number of months or even years. So a long period of investigation has to be like a study where the researchers enter the context and stay in the context for the long period.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Brett, you have also a question? You want to take the mic?
Good morning. I had some audio issues, so I missed some of the important content. So I'm looking forward to reviewing the recording
Video.
later.
Yeah.
But in broad terms, and again, I'm a knowledge manager, and I know that in the knowledge management community, there's been a discussion about the role of KM in this learning and development aspect of organizations. Some saying that learning and development and KM are parallel, some saying they're actually in conflict, and some saying they actually should be merged to be the same thing. So my initial question is did your research address that, look at that? Is that something that is within the scope of what you were looking at, please?
So I propose that organizational learning is key, it's really important, but it's part of the future research direction that look at the role of organizational mnemonics. So that includes learning, forgetting, and organizational memory. And indeed, I have now the another idea for a research project that this would be, that's something that I want to develop for the future that focus on the role of organizational mnemonics. But certainly organizational learning could be seen as a key process of professionalization because there is a change that needs to happen. So we need to remove the previous way of working, and if we have to facilitate the new way of working. So from the organizational mnemonic perspective, this would be an example of organizational unlearning, because we're trying to get rid of the previous way of working to make room for the new way of working. And we need study. We need additional empirical study on this particular process. If I may ask a question to the audience, I would be very interested in asking the extent to which the professionalization attempt that you have experienced is somehow in agreement with what the scholarly literature review is saying, or if there might be some missing aspects that we need to further investigate, because I think that it's very important to see how scholarly research is doing, but also to hear from practitioners and together see if there are some missing links that perhaps we can cover with further investigation.
Okay, so since I'm already here and I wanted to kind of touch this point,
Yes.
let me leap in first here. So I'm in the United States Army. I'm a civilian in the United States Army. So upskilling or training your team, training your subordinates is a leader imperative. It's something that you are personally graded on as a leader. It's an inherent part of your job, and it's in two approaches. One is building the individual, and then building the team by building the strength of the individual. We call it capability and capacity. And so microizing that into the KM community right now, we are, I know my organization particularly is very focused on, and in fact, the Army is focused on upskilling the workforce, particularly the civilian workforce. To your point, there's been, obviously people have been doing the same job for the number of years, and technology and techniques and organizational culture has changed, even though they have not. So getting the workforce to embrace some of these new technologies, to embrace some of these new skill sets, and more importantly, teaching managers and leaders how to supervise people in these new techniques. For example, teleworking, work from home, remote work, understanding how you can supervise properly when you don't actually have TouchCon on the people you supervise and still be an effective manager. So it's really a multi-pronged approach. And I would imagine that some of the research about teleworking, remote work, work from home kind of stuff is touching on those areas. I just don't know how much they're actually providing advice on building the workforce skill set versus complaining that managers don't get it. We're in the 21st century now, work from home is the way to go business. And there's a little bit of a conflict between the culture and the emotion, is my take on that. Over.
Oh, thank you. Seems to be like a very interesting area, but I'm sure that there may be already study conducted, especially after COVID, because we had to go all through this online process, and we had to adapt very fast with the newer working environment. My take would be that yes, the manager, they need to recognize that things are different. And also workforce is getting and becoming very different because we have new generation, and there may be intergenerational differences in the way that we work, and we also believe that we should work. So managers, they need to recognize that. But the other things also, and this is my personal take, that the system should be based on trust more than on monitoring system. Because the moment that you monitor people through IT or other means of checking whether or not they're working, there may be shortcuts that then people figure out. But if you really build the system on trust, then I think it may open lots of additional positive opportunity for the organization. It's difficult, I know, but that's my personal take on that.
Thank you. We have a question from Pratik, sorry. You have been raising your hand, Pratik, please.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Vincent and Stefania. Yeah, so that's great session. Yeah, so let me just, so basically I would like to understand that if you can provide some insights like how we can use explicit and tacit knowledge while communicating with stakeholders, SMEs, because both are different world together. Like on daily basis, we come across like explicit more, tacit less. Like maybe like an individual, we do not want to share all the information which we are having in our mind to everyone, be it project or something like this. So
yeah. So in a nutshell, what the research is telling us is that when it comes to individual explicit knowledge, we need to conduct a further investigation because we don't know much. But when it comes to collective knowledge, there are already some things that we can do. For instance, we can make sure that we come up with a clear numbers of job description, because the job description would change. And so when you move from a more professional organization, then you need to change the job description. So the codification of the job description and the sharing of them, it's really important. So everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. Then also making sure that you clarify the chain of command and span of control through a proper organizational chart. And this implies that you introduce a system of delegation and system of empowerment. In startup context or family-owned business, more family business, the owners is also the top managers, is a generalist, does everything. But the moment that you become a professional organization, you need to delegate part of this activity. So the system of delegation has to be clarified and make it available in a codified format. You can also, at the collective level, think about way to make sure that the professional knowledge is diffused throughout the organization, but also it's introduced into the organization. So the moment that you need to introduce this new tacit knowledge, you can hire independent board of directors, you can hire professional managers, you can hire directors of function, and especially the HR function seems to be one of the most crucial functions while you attempt a professionalization.
okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great insights.
We had a question also from Arun. Arun, are you here?
Yeah, not a question, but supporting what Ms. Stefania was mentioning, and also to support from my experience to David's question. The mission statement takes a long time to get into the organizational psyche, but when you take a customer-first approach and go with a brand positioning statement, that in turn changes the organization structure, because the organization has to become agile, and that from there you get the new knowledge requirements and new role definitions and the staffing requirements, as Stefania was mentioning. So that is one approach which I've interacted with scholars, where they have been able to quantify and say that, yeah, a good brand position statement is a place to start and make things more formal than the mission statement, which comes from the leader initially.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, the mission statement and the organizational strategy, as like textbook are telling us, they're not set in stone. So the moment that there are changes within the organization, those changes will also need to be reflected in new mission statement and new strategies. So it's like a briefing document. It's an evolving type of document that is not set in stone. And we're allowed to make these changes as the organization progresses and becomes a different entity.
Great. Manfred, do you want to share also your feedback?
Yes, I just would like to confirm, Vincent, the topic of professionalization in the organization is extremely important to the organizations I know. But unfortunately, Stefania, they are not really reporting it. I see a challenge here for the researchers who need the data and would like to connect to SMEs, but the SMEs mind just their business. I think it's their focus, of course, yeah. But as far as I know, they do a lot of knowledge management and professionalization in that kind of domain. But unfortunately, they're very hesitant to do an additional extra mile to tell us their story or to even let us watch. This is what I experience here in the German-speaking countries of Austria and Germany and parts of Switzerland.
Yeah, I hear you. And indeed, as a qualitative researchers, accessing the research setting is probably one of the most challenging aspects of the process. So at times, you really want to better understand the phenomenon, but simply you don't have access to enough data to give a proper explanation. So I totally agree with you, and I hear you, and I know that it's challenging. And I think I don't have an answer or as to how we can improve that. But maybe the managers or the CEOs or those who give access to the research setting, they have to be convinced that what we are doing has value, not only for the organization, but for the community as a whole.
So let me continue just one more item. I think there might be a role for the consultants here, because they have a kind of business relationship with the SMEs, but they do have a kind of interest, like a selfish interest, in documenting this kind of case studies. Of course, we have to mind the confidentiality. This is very important, and we must protect our partners and customers. But maybe we can win the group of consultants to be partners in the research process. And if academia could, for example, interview consultants as a kind of intermediary source, that might create a win-win-win situation and scenario. Yeah. So some of the SMEs I know are not really, keen to the academic language. They don't like the methods. For them, it's too slow and not business oriented. But for consultants, maybe there could be a win-win.
Yeah, and maybe some studies that would investigate the perspective and worldview of consultants while they were helping in professionalization attempt and the reporting of their worldview in a scholarly contribution. Why not?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think, Manfred, you have a follow-up question that you can reply through the chat from Simona. Stefania, let me ask a few questions and then I will pass back to some of our participants today. So I'm quite new to this field of personalization, and I was wondering, is there a particular critical size of this organization when this transition needs to happen? I mean, does literature say, well, when we go over 100 employees or when we go over 1,000, then there is this need? I'm sure there is a lot of different contextual factors, but is there a critical size of the organization where they start engaging into this professionalization based on your what you have read?
Well, I think that the two ways is that when you move from one generation of owners in a family-owned business to another generation of owners, no matter the size, if the new generation of owners wants to become a larger organization, wants to professionalize, then they start attempt this professionalization attempt. So it's very much related to the mindset of the new generation of owners. When it comes to organization, they discuss in general terms the threshold stage. So threshold stage, it means that we have a current organizational structures and the organizational system, but we cannot use as it is because they're growing opportunities. So we need to expand and restructure the organizational structure and system. And so when the organization reaches the threshold stage, this is an indication that we need to grow and professionalize. So if I have to give you an estimate, I don't think I have a number, but I have a construct, which is the threshold stage. And so reaching this stage, it's key in attempting professionalization at TAM.
Okay, great. And are there any statistics about also the rate of success or the rate of failure in going through this professionalization? I mean, I'm sure there are lots of SMEs that might not succeed in achieving their goals. So, but are there any statistic on this, like 50 or 70% succeed or fail into this professionalization process?
I haven't encountered a specific paper that look at this, like particular aspects, because the majority of contributions that I reviewed, they were, maybe single case, and they were investigating within a certain context, or maybe like in a couple of cases, a couple of times there were multiple cases that were conducted across different countries, but there was not one article that was somehow reviewing the entire set of the literatures and give an estimate of the success or failure rate. Maybe this could be an interesting study to conduct for those who are, good with statistics.
Yes.
In my case, I'm more a qualitative researcher, so it may not be my piece of cake, but I'm pretty much sure maybe your case could be, like the next paper to produce.
Well, we know, I think it's well known that, I mean, when you were talking about different generation taking over, we know that businesses usually last over 2 or 3 generations and then die, right? So, I mean, do they die because they are not able to re-question themselves, or because they engage into this some kind of professionalization and they are not able to make it happen, and at the end everything collapses? So this could be also a way to look at it. Last thing, I mean, when you were presenting all of this, I kind of make the, I mean, I can see a close analogy with what organizations are going through nowadays about digital transformation, right? So, I mean, when they want to digitally transform, they also need to, I mean, to capitalize on what they know, to rethink about how they could put it in a digitalized way. And I mean, the process are different, but I think it's still required, again, to capture, I mean, the current know-how, to question it and to rethink how maybe we could do things more efficiently with the use of technology, and again, get people on board to follow this trend. So I think maybe some work that are done currently on an SMEs organizations that are currently trying to digitally transform. There might be a lot of similarities between the process or the challenge that they face.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, this is just a comment. Okay, we had, let me see, let me go back to my comment. Marty, you had also a comment, maybe if you want to share.
Sure. I think it's just it's literally just a comment, and I have not done any research on it at this point. But many organizations here in South Africa have maintained their hybrid work space that comes from the COVID lockdowns, and through that, knowledge management professionalization has increased because people need that collaboration spaces. And there's definitely an accelerated move towards or a much more open, positive approach to knowledge management practices, because the people can see the value in having that kind of situation supported by a formal process in the organization.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Okay. Do we have any other question or comments for Stefania? Don't be shy.
I think that if we're ending it, this is a time to remind people to join our WhatsApp team, because on our WhatsApp group we also will upload the YouTube link and additional things, and it's also a way between meetings to help each other, ask each other questions, see if we can run some shared researches and more.
Yes, so I just shared again the link to the WhatsApp group and to the YouTube channel where you will be able to see the recording. Well, thank you so very much, Stefania, for this great presentation. And you will see there's been a lot of discussion happening through the chat, so you can we will share the chat with you. Feel free to, I guess, to connect with Stefania if you want to follow up, or if you have I guess, a field of studies that Stefania could engage with. I'm sure it's always useful. Don't forget, month of October, visit our KMGN website. You will see all the events on KM Global Week happening mid-October. So I'm sure there are events happening in your country or that you can join online. And for us, our next meeting will be in January 2025. So we will share very soon the speaker for next year. But if, once again, if some of you are interested to share whatever they have, it doesn't have to be a completely finished project. It can be just some idea you would like to share and get feedback from. Please contact Moria or myself, and we will be happy to schedule you for next year presentation. Thank you all again very much. Yes.
On behalf of all of us, thank you, Vincent, for leading this community.
Okay, well, my pleasure. You're doing the hard work. So, and thank you again, Stefania, for today's presentation. It was great. Take a good care, everyone, and see you next year. Bye-bye.